Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Mark Morton, talking about his new YA dystopian science fiction novel, The Headmasters, out February 6th from Shadowpaw Press. Welcome to the Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to authors about their latest books. This is episode 153. The first 150 episodes were audio only, and we're focused on the creative process. We still talk about the creative process, but our real focus is on new releases now here on the Worldshapers. And although so far I've only talked to science fiction fantasy authors, I will be expanding that to authors in other genres a little bit, although I will always have room for science fiction and fantasy authors on the Worldshapers. Among other things, coming out of the Worldshapers has been a series of anthologies called Shapers of Worlds, and Shapers of Worlds Volume 4 just released last week on January 23rd. You can find it everywhere. You can find it also directly from Shadowpaw Press. I am the publisher and editor at Shadowpaw Press. That's one of the things I do. So I highly recommend that. It has some great stories in it from some great authors from the fourth year of the podcast. And I'm already working on the Kickstarter for Shapers of Worlds Volume 5. All 5 of these anthologies were Kickstarted. And I have 20-some authors from the fifth year and a bit beyond have agreed to be part of the next one. So I'll be talking about that quite a bit more as well. I am myself an author of science fiction fantasy, and in fact, I do have a story in Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. My most recent novel was The Tangled Stars, which came out from Daub Books in the late fall of 2022. So I'm kind of between novels at the moment, but I'll be working on more this year. So hopefully there'll be some more novels for me in the not too distant future. Also working on a nonfiction book that also draws on this podcast, specifically my interviews with Canadian authors about how they go about crafting science fiction and fantasy. So I'm a writer, I'm a publisher, I'm an editor, and I'm the host of the Worldshapers podcast. And in this episode, we will be talking to Mark Morton. Mark Morton is the author of The Headmasters, which is a YA dystopian novel that's coming out on February 6th. And by way of introduction, let me put on my reading glasses, and I will read his bio from the back of the book, and then we'll get into the interview. So, Mark Morton is also the author of Cupboard Love, a Dictionary of Culinary Curiosities, which was nominated for a Julia Child Award and which will be republished by Shadowpaw Press later this year, early 2025, I'm not sure which. He also is the author of The End, Closing Words for Millennium, which won the Alexander Isbister Award for nonfiction. The Lover's Tongue, A Merry Romp Through the Language of Love and Sex, which was republished in the UK as Dirty Words. And Cooking with Shakespeare. He's written more than 50 columns for Gastronomica, the Journal of Food and Culture from the University of California Press, and has written and broadcast more than 100 columns about language and culture for CBC Radio here in Canada. Mark has a PhD in 16th-century literature from the University of Toronto and has taught at several universities in France and Canada. He currently works at the University of Waterloo, and he and his wife, Melanie Cameron, who is also an author, have 4 children, 3 dogs, 1 rabbit, and no time. This is the Worldshapers, and now let's talk to Mark Morton. So, Mark, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thank you. I'm really, really glad to be here.
We were just talking beforehand. We actually, bizarrely rather, know each other from way, way back.
Yeah.
Back when I was I news editor? Probably I was news editor or reporter at the time. I don't remember which.
I think you were a reporter then.
So that would have been in 82.
Yep.
I went off on a European tour with my university chorus for, I think it was a month in 82. I did it again in 87 after I was news editor. And I guess, you were my fill-in while I was gone.
Yeah. I think at age 18, the publisher very kindly hired me. I just walked into his office one day off the street and said, would you hire me? And he took a chance on me.
Well, he'd hired me at the age of 20, and he made me news editor at the age of 24. So he had no problem with young people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, neither one of us is quite that young anymore. But
no, I wonder what happened.
Yeah, funny that. So we are, of course, going to be talking about your first novel, The Headmasters. You are not a first-time book writer, but your first novel. So before we get to that, maybe tell us a bit more about your writing journey. Where are you from, and how did you get into all this writing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as they say, I was born at a very young age, and I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. And I always wanted to be a writer from my earliest memories. And, we didn't have a lot of books. We were just a tiny little farm. And I think one of my earliest memories was we had a Webster's dictionary that had Latin phrases at the end. And I recall trying to teach myself, memorize these Latin phrases. And my parents saw this and saw that I was really interested in, writing and learning, and they were great. They were very supportive. There was never any expectation that I would become a farmer. That probably would have been very dangerous anyway. And then as I went to school, I had great English teachers. And then actually I didn't sort of realize if I could actually make a living at that, though. So when I started university at University of Regina, I started in the physics department, because I always liked physics too. But then after a year and a half, I switched over to English, and then just did my BA, and then went to the University of Toronto for my MA and PhD, and then went to the University of Winnipeg to teach. And that's where I started to write books. And I think my book writing came out of broadcasting, because the first thing I did while I was still teaching at the University of Winnipeg is I went over to the CBC building, which was right next door, and asked if I could do a column about word origins. And they said, sure, try me out again. And so I did. And so it grew from a regional program to something I was doing for the national show called Definitely Not the Opera. And I did probably a total of about 100 columns on language. And that made me think, well, maybe I could write a book about word origins. I mean, there's lots of books out there, but first thing I wanted to do was write a book about the origins and histories of food words and cooking words. So I did that. That was called Cupboard Love. And then I think the next thing I did was 1999 was approaching, and I thought, everybody's talking about Y2K. I wonder how people at the ends of previous centuries celebrated or commemorated the end of their century. So I wrote a book about that with a friend, a co-author. That was really interesting to do, to look at all that history. And then I went back to etymology and word origins, and I wrote a book called The Lover's Tongue about the origins of words pertaining to love and sex. And then the last nonfiction book I wrote was called Cooking with Shakespeare. And it was about food culture in 16th century England. It had recipes in it, but also some history about, what people ate and attitudes towards food and food laws, things like that. Like if you were of a certain class, you weren't allowed to eat certain kinds of food. So that was really interesting. Then my wife and I moved out to here, Waterloo, where I'm sitting right now. And I started working at the University of Waterloo. And kind of at the same time, we adopted 4 older kids. And so that just put the kibosh on any writing for about 15 or 17 years. But they got older and more independent. And so that's when I thought, well, I want to start writing again. But, having raised 4 kids and having read lots of young adult stuff, I thought I want to try writing a novel. So I did. And that's where the Headmasters came out of.
So we should a couple of things to mention. First of all, that first the book about cooking terms is going to be reissued by Shadowpaw Press, which of course is my publishing company, which is also publishing the Headmasters. So I'm looking forward to giving that the once over and getting that out in a fresh edition probably later this year, possibly 2025. I'm not promising. It's just me and the cat. And
well, the word origins won't change, so there's no way.
That's true. And also a connection that I hadn't thought about, but I was on CBC Radio here in Regina for Ooh, 17 years I did a weekly
Yeah,
science column on the
I
afternoon
I,
edition there
I
in
heard
Regina.
you. Yeah, I mean, Regina has a really good science center, right?
Yeah, well, and that's what brought me up here. I was
Yeah,
hired as a communications officer for the Saskatchewan Science Center, and I
yeah,
wrote most of the copy for the original exhibits, and there's still a lot of my words still in that building.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I did hear you once when I was back in Regina
Yeah,
for
people
something like that.
still remember that.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, eventually it went away, but it was a good gig while it lasted.
yeah, yeah.
So with the Headmasters, maybe this is the place to give a description of the book or a synopsis, and whatever level of detail you want to give without giving away whatever it is you don't
Sure.
want to give away.
Okay. Well, let's see. It's a young adult novel. It's dystopian, and it's set in northern Ontario, near an area around French River. I really like it there. It's very beautiful, but at the same time, it's really, really rugged. And the premise of the novel is this: that some sort of catastrophe happens caused by humans, and in fact, it originates at this research place near French River called Blue Ring. I don't know why I called it Blue Ring. I just did. Like the sound of it. And everybody who's within Blue Ring, and the Blue Ring is sort of this, I don't know what you'd call it. I guess I do call it something. This coil around the community.
Particle accelerator, perhaps, of some sort?
Yes, it's basically a kind of particle accelerator, yeah. And everybody inside the Blue Ring, about 200 workers and administrators and things like that, they survive, but everybody outside of the Blue Ring across the world seemingly is, well, not immediately killed, but their language, their vocabulary gets shifted around. So basically it becomes like a world of babble. Nobody can understand each other, and that is what leads to the ultimate collapse of society, although the people in the Blue Ring don't know that until much later.
Yeah, it's really that's really very much off stage for the entire book.
It is, yeah. And I was, perhaps you and I can talk at some time, because I did that because I thought, oh, maybe that would make a nice sequel.
Well, there's a whole world out there.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what happened to the people inside Blue Ring is that they all woke up because this catastrophe kind of knocked them out. They woke up in the snow because they were so happy that this particle accelerator thing had worked. But they all became unconscious when it went awry, and they wake up in the snow, and not all of them. Some of them already have these creatures on their backs, attached to their backs, about plate size is how I imagine them. I also imagine them as looking like wood ticks, because I absolutely hate wood ticks.
A plate-sized wood tick is a nightmare.
And so, the people that don't have the wood ticks on them, they pull all the ones that do into the gymnasium, I think, that they have at the research facility. And then what happens is eventually the people with wood ticks, they're taken over by the headmasters, as they come to be called. And the headmasters are ruthless, and they basically overcome the people without headmasters by saying that they are going to harm the people with headmasters, and nobody wants that to happen. So eventually they kind of give up. There's a fight involving hockey sticks and skates and things like that. But eventually the entire community ends up with headmasters. And the thing about headmasters, you might think, well, why don't they just pull them off each other? But they can't. The headmasters are kind of locked into their brains, and so they sense what the humans are thinking. And if somebody even thinks about getting rid of their headmaster, a toxin will be injected into their brains, and they'll be instantly dead. So that's the premise that I found really interesting, which is like, how do you fight against an enemy that is subjugating you, when even thinking about pushing back, about fighting back, is impossible. But the other thing about the headmasters is that, over the course of 60 years, like, we're sort of dealing with 3 generations of people at the Blue Ring facility.
Yeah, I should say that the initial attack is actually told in flashback, essentially.
Yes, that's right.
We're actually well established by the time the book gets started.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And as a result, the people who are there 60 years after the catastrophe happens, they are pretty much beaten down. But one of the things about the headmasters too is that because they're attached to one person, and then eventually that person dies, and then another one, and then maybe even another one through the generations, each person's memories kind of get sucked up into the headmaster while it's attached to them. And then when it gets reattached, those memories are kind of latent, so that the person with the new person with the headmaster, if they encounter something that reminds them, or that reminds the old memories, so to speak, and one of the old memories from the previous host arises, that's very dangerous. It kind of short circuits their brain, and it can be fatal. So as a result, everybody in the community, they've basically made a rule that nobody can talk about the past. Nobody can talk about people who've died.
Which makes it really hard to fight these things.
It makes it hard to fight them.
Remember what happened before.
Exactly. So they kind of have no past. They live in this awful present, and they can't imagine anything different happening in the future. So it's a pretty grim situation for them. But there is one young woman, I think she is 12 or so when she's first introduced. I called her Maple. And what's unique about her is that she happens to have the headmaster that belonged to her grandmother, one of the first generation people. And her grandmother had been a very innovative, bold person, and had attempted to defeat the headmasters, came so close to doing it, but didn't. Well, maybe I'm giving away too much. But anyways, Maple is drawing upon her grandmother's memories as she begins to try to fight back against the headmasters. Then there's another plot kind of involving a young fellow named Thorn. He's about the same age as Maple, and as they grow up, they become not just friends but partners by the time they've reached their late teens or 20s. So that's most of the premise, I guess.
So what was the impetus? I mean, what got you headed down the path of creating this?
Yeah.
Other than the fact that you hate wood ticks.
Well, that was part of it, because I thought, if I'm going to write a dystopian novel about some sort of alien creature, what's the most horrifying thing? And to me, it's wood ticks, especially plate-sized ones. The other thing that I think was in the back of my head, and I remember sitting in a cafe thinking about this. I write a lot in cafes.
So do I.
I just have to let one of my dogs in. Come on. We have 4 dogs, and 2 of them are sucks, and they always have to be around me. So I was writing in a cafe, or sitting in a cafe thinking about writing, and it struck me, well, it had long struck me, how much inequality there is in the world. And there's people in urban parts of cities that are, basically kind of trapped where they are. They see, what's the futility of even trying to get out. There's people, let's say, in the old coal towns of Kentucky, the same kind of thing, just absolute despair. There's people in Canada, Indigenous people, because of what Canada has done over the generations and centuries, that also, I think, feel stuck and in despair. So it's not that I wanted to write an allegory about that. The book isn't that at all. But I wanted the book to have a kind of valence, let's say, that was bigger than just a dystopian, well, there's no car chases, but I didn't want it just to be a kind of an action kind of book. I wanted it to have some bigger aspects to it. So I took that idea, the fact that there are so many millions of people who feel stuck in hopeless situations, and kind of that became the premise of the plot for the Headmasters.
What did your outlining process look like? This goes back to the old version of the Worldshapers where I always talked about the creative process, but I really am always interested, which is, you know, this is your first novel? Did you do a
Yep.
detailed outline, or how did you
Well,
approach what was a new task for you?
yeah, it was really hard. I recall not feeling that challenged about anything, well, since we adopted 4 kids. And I had lots of false starts, and I tried, you know, to create a very detailed outline, and then I just felt kind of hemmed in by it. But at the same time, it didn't seem to work when I would just write freely, you know. So eventually I came up with a loose outline, kind of an arc, I guess, where things wanted to go. Started writing, and then because it's a novel where the plot has, I think, some intricacies in terms of how things work, I had to think about it a lot. And I recall, you know, I'd wake up at night and I would just think and think and think, okay, how can they get out of this situation? What can happen here? So it was a lot of hard thinking. And I guess eventually I had a full draft, not of beer, of a book, of a manuscript, and started
Maybe in a full draft
rewriting.
of the other kind, it's somewhere along the way.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And I guess I took about 7 days, and I went to a kind of residence in London, Ontario, just so I could just totally focus. And I went through it and really tried to edit it for like 16 hours a day. And it started to feel pretty good. And after that, it was just, you know, proofreading and tweaking and things like that.
Did you share it with anybody at any point for feedback?
Yeah. As I was writing it, my wife was, you know, reading it, and I would talk to her about things. That's not ideal because, you know, that person, you know, if you do that with someone, they get it kind of piecemeal and so on. So they're not really reading it per se. But I had a friend, Victoria, who I also gave it to in almost final draft form. She has a very literary sensibility. Very sensitive reader, sensitive soul, and she gave me some really, really good feedback on it, especially with regard to the character of Maple. So yeah, she was the first person to really read it, and then I think I gave it to a couple of young adults, and you know, they weren't able to they didn't want to take time, I guess, to give as detailed feedback, but they gave me some general feedback that was helpful as well.
You had said that, you know, you're raising these kids and you were reading and familiar with young adult fiction. Mm-hmm. What do you think the Headmasters brings that's different from a lot of it?
A lot of the other kind of young adults?
Yeah. Was there something specific that you were reacting to and when you took your crack at it?
I had read with the kids the Hunger Games, and I admire that. Those books immensely, and we had read the Harry Potter books as well. I didn't like that as much. I guess what I wanted to do was write a book that ultimately I think is about the power of hope and love. And I guess the other thing too is I wanted to write a book that was set in Canada, in a place that I love, around French River. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, you have written novels that are set in Regina.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think it's good.
I try to sneak little Saskatchewan in a lot of my books, even the ones that are fantasy realms. There's often some Saskatchewan reference, or I did one where the faster than light drive was developed at the University of Saskatchewan, just to throw away.
Yeah. So. It's fun to do that. You know, Carol Shields did something similar in The Stone Diaries, but she changed things. So she has streets that exist, but they don't actually intersect, even though in her book they intersect. Things like that. So it helps to create this sense of reality, but unreality as well.
Yeah. Well, it's not reality. I mean, this podcast is called The Worldshapers. You're shaping the world. Even if you're writing mimetic fiction, it's still not the real world.
Exactly.
It's still a world that you have shaped. So
yeah.
So what was the publishing journey? I mean, I know it came to me, but what came before all that?
Well, things had changed. I like we said, I published 4 books previously, and one of them was bought by a publisher in the UK, and they changed the title of The Lover's Tongue to Dirty Words without even consulting me or the
Not
Canadian.
nearly as good a title, I don't think.
No. Another one of my books, very strangely, I think, had been translated into Czech. I mean, how do you translate a etymological dictionary? But they did. So my experience with publishing was kind of dated by the time I got to this, and things had changed immensely. I mean, things like Kindle books and e-publishing and all those kinds of things. The rise of Amazon, that sort of stuff. So it was a totally different world. So I think, the publishing experience that I had before, I don't think it was of any help, and maybe it even just kind of sent me in the wrong direction. So
At least you don't have to send printed out manuscripts anymore.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the cost of paper now. Yeah. So I sent it out to some publishers, and most of them I didn't hear back from. A couple I heard back from, and they said, well, this is good. We've looked at it, we admire it, but we don't publish this kind of thing. Or they would say, our catalog is full right now. Then I sent it to another Regina press.
Radiant.
Yes. And
Radiant Press.
they suggested that that it would be better suited to your press, to Shadowpaw. So I sent it to you, and you liked it, and Bob's your uncle.
Yes, and John Kennedy, who's runs Shadowpaw Press. I'm sorry, runs Radiant Press. Is somebody I've known for a long time. We're on the Sask Books board together, and he really loved the book, but they don't have a YA line of any sort, really.
Right.
And, so that's why he said. And whereas I am, Shadowpaw Press is nothing if not eclectic. I'm publishing all sorts of things. He knew that of course, I write YA science fiction fantasy myself, and so he sent it to me, and here we are. So I'm very happy to be bringing it out.
Yeah.
February 6th, which will be, let's see, what's this weekend? What's this Sunday? It's a week from this Sunday is when a week from this next Tuesday is when the book will be out. February 6th. So anyway, this will be out about 10 days before. If you're watching this when it comes out, that's when it's coming out.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, what I have also found along this journey is the kindness and generosity of people, like the people from other publishing houses that gave me some feedback, and John Kennedy, very kindly, suggesting that I send it to you. Recently, Robert Sawyer, looked at the manuscript and gave it a very, very positive.
That was a great blurb.
a really nice blurb. And he's of huge stature. He didn't need to do that, but he took time to do that, because I think he really sees that it's important for this ecosystem of authors and publishers to collaborate. And to work together when it does work.
It's both the publishing side of things and also the science fiction side of things. Science fiction is its own much smaller community, even. Yeah. And generally, I find that Canadian science fiction people are very supportive of each other. So now, this is a self-serving question in a way, but how was the editing process for you?
Well, I think I sent you a pretty clean copy.
It was, yes.
I mean, you can read it a billion times and you always miss some things.
I suspect I've still missed something, but we both have. But.
Yeah. And, I have written for so long. I've taught English for many, many years. But, there are still times when I say, okay, is this a compound adjective or not? Does it need a hyphen or not? But I mean, I don't think you felt that it needed any big substantive edits. I don't think we did anything like that.
No, it was mostly just copy editing, which is and a few places where I thought there were some things weren't clear, or there was a contradiction or something like that. It is exactly. It is a complicated structure in a way because it does span many years. So there are time skips in between, and then you have the memories, which are coming in from the past. And there were some interesting typographical things that were necessary to bring that across
Yes.
on the page. So
Yeah.
it was fun to work with, and looking forward to it coming out. What are your hopes for it when it comes out?
Well,
What do you hope reader reaction will be?
I honestly think that people will like it. I think it's a really, really good book. I think it's a really, really good story. It's a long book. It's like 400 and some pages, I think. But maybe
it is quite long for the genre. But
yeah, for the genre, yeah. But I feel that it's a good book, and I think if we can get it into people's hands, young people's hands, and their parents' hands, I think if they read it, they'll really like it, and they'll want more, hopefully. So that's what I hope. But I'm also a pragmatist, and there are so many books out there, so many really, really good books.
That is, and you talked about how the publishing world has changed. That is one of the things that has changed, is that we are absolutely inundated because of the ease of self-publishing. With books. And when I started, which my nonfiction books were coming out, my first nonfiction books were coming out about the same time yours were, in the mid-90s. First of all, what I was writing wasn't going to be huge bestsellers, because my first book was using Microsoft Publisher for Windows 95, so never going to be made into a movie. But still, you didn't have even then, when I was shopping my novels around to begin with, you weren't competing for readers' eyeballs like you are now. So it's a huge challenge. And but if the book is good, it'll find some readers. How many? Hopefully enough. Hopefully a lot. You just never know. It's like hoping for lightning to strike, I guess.
I hope it's not like Emily Dickinson or Van Gogh, where people discover the book only after the creator is dead. That would tick me off. But yeah, it is. But yeah, my first book, my first nonfiction book, back in 96, I think it came out. The publisher actually approached me, so it was a breeze. Things are so different now. Yeah.
However, it is coming out on January the 6th. Now, you have a joint book launch coming up, don't you?
Yes, I do, at the Waterloo Public Library, with Kristen Ciccarelli, who has a number of fantasy novels and a series within that. And they have done really, really well. I mean, she's sold I think hundreds of thousands of copies of books.
Really, I need to have her on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And she used to live here in Kitchener-Waterloo, now lives somewhat out of the area, but she's coming back here for the book launch. And we're going to interview each other and then open it up for questions. I don't like it when I've gone to so many readings. I was a co-founder of the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, and I believe in readings very much. I still do. But what I found was, readings where the author just gets up and reads something and then talks about something weren't as interesting as ones where there was interaction, somebody interviewing them. And I think that will work really well if Kristen is reading my book, and Kristen is interviewing me about my book, and I'm interviewing her about her book, because they are different genres. Fantasy versus dystopian science.
So hers is YA as well.
Yes. Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Well, yours is it's YA, but the character does age up to young adult. It covers a wide range. I mean, any young, but I think older readers will enjoy it as well, as Robert J. Sawyer did. So I think.
I sure hope so. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. I said in an interview recently, that in order to be successful as an author, like really successful, you have to be good. You have to have talent, and then you also have to be determined. You have to sit your butt down, every day or almost every day, and either write or stare at your notepad or your computer until you start to write. And the third thing is you have to have good luck. I mean, there's so many great writers that I think, haven't had good luck. They don't get discovered for a long time. So, one has to have good luck, but at the same time, I'd qualify that, and say that one can maybe not create your own good luck, but you can invite good luck.
Just a matter of, the book is there. So once it's out there, you never know. You just never know. It's like you're throwing something out into the world and waiting to see what happens to it. And
yeah. Well, like with the Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling's, I think she said that she submitted it, I don't know, was it 10, 20, 30 publishers?
Yeah, a huge number of publishers, yeah. And that story happens a lot. You just, and then later on you get the stories of the editor who rejected what became this worldwide bestseller. Yeah. But the whole point of this is that nobody actually knows what they're doing. So.
It's true.
And ultimately it comes down to readers, and word of mouth is the biggest thing that pushes books. So anyway, I'm certainly hopeful that it will have a good response, and it will be widely available on January 6th through all of the usual suspects, online and off. Any bookstore can order it in. It's distributed through Litdistco here in Canada, which is one of the literary distribution companies, and they also distribute into the States. So we'll get it out there anyway.
Yeah. Good.
Now, where can people keep up with you online, if anywhere?
Well, I've created a Facebook author page. It's just Mark Morton author. If people search for that on Facebook, they'll find that. I also use Twitter more and more, but the thing is, I'm still kind of steamed about this. I got onto Twitter quite early. So I had at Mark Morton, and there's hundreds of Mark Mortons in North America, around the world, including the bass guitarist for this death metal band called Lamb of God. And he and I have actually corresponded because we
get him to write a song about the Headmasters.
Maybe.
Make it into a trailer.
Yep. So I had at Mark Morton for Twitter for a long time, and then somebody hacked it and Twitter suspended it. And despite my efforts, they have not reactivated it. So I had to create a new Twitter handle. And of course, by now or by then, every Mark Morton had claimed something,
Mark Mortonish.
Mark Mortonish, exactly. Except for Mark Morton backwards. So my Twitter handle now is not cram. So,
well, that's unique.
Yeah.
And if you need a pseudonym for a pen name, you've got one right there.
Yeah.
Not Rom Cram.
Not Rom Cram. Yeah. So that, and I don't really use Instagram yet much. My intention is to do so.
Everybody's intention is to do so. It's hard to keep using it, I find.
Yeah. Oh, and if people read the book and they want to email me with some feedback, I would be happy to receive email. My email address is Mark Stephen Morton, Stephen with a V in the middle. So just Mark Stephen Morton @gmail.com. Oh, and my literary website is markmorton.ca, where people can see my other previous books and things like that. So I'm happy to interact.
Worth mentioning again that your first nonfiction book, Cupboard Love, will be coming out in a new edition from Shadowpaw Press a few months down the road from now, but it will happen, I hope.
Yep.
I guess first, what was the date of the book launch again?
It was set for something, and then it was set for something else. It's now in March. I think it's March 19th. I think it's March 19th. Yeah.
And I guess then the last question is, what are you working on now, fiction-wise, if anything?
Well, As I was saying before, I wrote the Headmasters in such a way that I think a sequel is possible. But I also thought, well, it doesn't make sense to start writing a sequel until the first one is published. And so
I'm not offering 2-book deals. So.
Yeah. So I started writing another dystopian book, novel, but it's not young adult. It's the kind of thing that I don't think I would want my mid-teens to be reading. It's a more serious book. It's a bit more graphic, I guess. But yeah, I like it. And I like what I admire in that book, how I have played with narrative structure and narrative voice. I was reading a lot of Faulkner, and how he has different voices and jumps around, and I found that really compelling. So my second book does that as well.
So obviously the fiction bug has got you good.
Yeah. I hope
kind of like this plate-sized wood tick on the back of your head, on your back, with its tendrils in your brain telling you, write fiction, write fiction.
Yeah. Well, I even thought this. Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon epic. Well, there was John Gardner, I think, back in the 70s, wrote a book called Grendel, in which he takes the perspective of the monster, one of the monsters.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, a kind of sympathetic look. And I even thought, well, it'd be kind of interesting to write, a novel, or maybe just a short story about the Headmasters from their perspective, because as far as we know, they didn't intend to come here. They were just kind of pulled in through some sort of, I don't know, portal or something like that. And I mean, in a way, they're just using humans as beasts of burden in the same way that humans have long done and still do.
Well, that's an interesting idea. Well, anyway, thanks so much for being on the Worldshapers. And again, the book will come out on February 6th. You can get it anywhere, and also directly from Shadowpaw Press, although I can't compete with Amazon shipping costs, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But you can get the ebooks direct. It is an ebook, we should say. And you can get the ebook directly from Shadowpaw Press. And actually, I recommend that, because that way the more money comes in. So.
Yeah.
than through any of the other outlets. So,
yeah.
So thanks, Mark, so much for
Thank
being
you.
on.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure we will be talking again soon as this goes forward. So, thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ed.
And thanks again to Mark for that terrific conversation. I enjoyed that. I hope you did as well. Just a few things to put out there as we wrap up this episode of the Worldshapers. You can find the Worldshapers online, well, obviously right here, but on the Worldshapers website, which is theworldshapers.com. You can find the Worldshapers on Twitter at the Worldshapers, X at the Worldshapers, and you can find it on Facebook at the Worldshapers. You can find me online at edwardwillett.com. You can see the spelling of my name down there, edwardwillett.com. I'm on X at ewillett. I'm on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. And I'm on Facebook at edward.willett. Oh, and of course, I am on YouTube, which may be where you're watching this, at Edward Willett, at Edward Willett, youtube.com/Edward Willett. And one of the things you can find on this YouTube channel, as well as the Worldshapers podcast, is walking in Regina. I walk around my home city of Regina, Saskatchewan quite a lot, and I live stream those walks and then post them here. So come take a walk with me. I usually blather on about this and that as I walk, including quite a bit about what I'm working on as a writer and as a publisher. So check that out, Walking in Regina. There's a whole playlist for it, as I've switched to this video format. You can find the original audio recordings of all the previous episodes, and these are also audio only. There are audio only versions of these video podcasts on the Worldshapers. Find Shadowpaw Press, my publishing company, at shadowpawpress.com. Also on Twitter at Shadowpaw, and on X at Shadowpaw Press. You guys can't get my head around that X/Twitter thing. And on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press, and on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. It's the only one kind of that I remembered to use the same handle for everything. And again, from Shadowpaw Press, just this last week, was Shapers of Worlds Volume 4, an anthology of science fiction and fantasy featuring authors who were guests on this podcast during its 4th year. Also released last week was The Good Soldier by Nir Yaniv, a military science fiction satire, think MASH in outer space, or Catch-22 meets Starship Troopers, or all of the above. And I interviewed Nir, of course, on here last week's podcast, so you can check that out as well. And you can find those books everywhere. And then the Headmasters, which we just spoke about on this podcast, and where you can find all of it. And that's it for this episode. So thanks again for watching. And I still have to get used to saying that, not just listening, watching and or listening. And I'll be back again, I hope, to do this weekly. So keep looking for it every Sunday. There should be a new episode of The Worldshapers. Bye for now.